In 1983, a promising young artist named Clara Carter disappeared from the small town of Larkswood without a trace, leaving behind only an unfinished canvas with the word truth scrawled across it. 30 years later, her brother Ethan returns to unravel the mystery. But what he uncovers is far more horrifying than he ever imagined. A dark secret buried by the town's founders, one that could destroy everything they've worked to keep hidden. The small town of Larkswood, Maine, was the sort of place you could easily forget about. Its sleepy streets were lined with weathered Victorian houses and thick, towering pines. It wasn't the kind of town that made headlines, and most outsiders had never heard of it. But for Ethan Carter, it was home, a place of memories both bitter and sweet, where his childhood had been shaped by his sister, Clara, and the subtle hum of life that pulsed beneath the surface. Clara Carter was the town's quiet mystery. Known for her talent as an artist, she'd always been a little different, with a mind that seemed to stretch beyond the ordinary. Her paintings had the kind of rawness to them that made people feel like they were looking into something deep and hidden, like the paintings could unlock something dark and ancient that had been lost to time. Her style was unique, abstract, yet hauntingly familiar, full of swirls of dark color that seemed to swirl around something unseen, something forbidden. Even in the few short years she'd lived in Larkswood, Clara had made an impression, not just with her art, but with her presence. To her family, Clara had always been something special. She wasn't like the other kids in town. She never fit the mold. While other children played outside or followed the typical routines of high school life, Clara was always in her studio. Her easel set up by the tall windows that let in the soft light from the forest that surrounded the town. Her brush strokes were quick, precise, and reflected something inside her that was always at war with itself. Something that people couldn't quite understand but knew, on some level, was important. She had been on the brink of breaking out into the art world. Her first gallery showing had been scheduled for October 1983. A small gallery in Boston had taken an interest in her work, and Clara was ready to leave Larkswood, ready to make her name known. Ethan had been proud of her, proud of his sister, who had made something of herself in a town that often stifled dreams. They had big plans to visit Boston together after the show, to explore the city and celebrate. But that was not to be. The night Clara disappeared, the last memory anyone had of her was a hurried phone call to Ethan. She'd sounded excited but nervous, telling him she was preparing for the show, that everything was coming together. The conversation ended with Clara promising to call again later that night, once everything was packed. It was the last time Ethan would ever hear her voice. The next morning, her apartment was empty. Her brushes were scattered on the floor, and the unfinished canvas she had been working on lay covered in splashes of crimson and black, a violent mess of color. Her belongings were still in place. Nothing seemed disturbed, yet she was gone. No note, no explanation, just the faintest trace of her presence in the room. The word truth was painted in bold, uneven strokes across the canvas, an eerie message that had never been fully understood. The police looked into it, but there was no sign of forced entry, no leads, no witnesses. It was as though Clara had vanished into thin air, swallowed by the town she'd once called home. The town rallied around her family, offering sympathy, prayers, and empty word of comfort. But as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the search for Clara faded from the headlines. It wasn't that people stopped caring. It was that they started to forget. Life in Larkswood returned to its regular, uneventful rhythm. Ethan tried to move on, but his heart never truly healed. Every corner of the town, every rustling leaf in the forest, reminded him of his sister. He would lie awake at night, his mind replaying the last conversation they had, trying to find some clue in her voice that might have told him something more, something important. But no answers came. The town was silent, and so was he. For the next decade, Ethan kept Clara's memory alive in his own quiet way, his grief buried beneath the weight of routine. He became a journalist, mostly covering local events, unimportant stories about school fundraisers, charity drives, and occasional murder that made headlines for a few days before being forgotten. It was an easy life, but a hollow one. He buried himself in his work, telling himself that the town had moved on, and maybe, just maybe, it was time for him to do the same. He couldn't bring her back, couldn't change what happened. No one could. He was just one more person caught in the web of silence that surrounded her disappearance. Then in 2010, something happened. A simple discovery in the attic. A place Ethan had avoided for years. It had always been full of old furniture, forgotten memories, and dust, but this time, something was different. Among the boxes of his parents' old things, he found a journal that Clara had kept in the final years before her disappearance. It was hidden in an old wooden box, tucked away as if it had been deliberately concealed. The journal was strange. The writing was frantic, scattered, as if Clara had been trying to tell herself something important. Something she couldn't quite put into words. The pages were filled with cryptic phrases, unfinished sentences, and random sketches of landscapes and faces. But one thing stood out. Toward the end of the journal, Clara had written about something she had uncovered. Something dark. Something that connected her art to the history of the town. The most chilling part, though, was a map that Clara had drawn on the last page. A map leading to a mansion on the outskirts of Larkswood. A mansion no one had spoken of in years. The map was unclear, almost as if Clara hadn't finished it. But it was enough. The thought of Clara's words, truth, lingered in Ethan's mind. He felt that now, after all these years, he might finally be close to the answers he had longed for. He might finally find the truth about what had happened to his sister. But what Ethan didn't know was that the truth he was searching for would not bring him peace. It would bring something far worse, something the town had fought to keep buried for decades. And once it was unearthed, there would be no going back. Ethan stood in the dusty attic of the Carter family home, his heart beating faster than he liked to admit. It was a place he had avoided for years, a space filled with forgotten items and memories he wasn't ready to confront. The worn wooden beams above creaked under the weight of time, and the air smelled faintly of mildew and old leather. Boxes, their labels faded from age, were stacked haphazardly around the room. But it wasn't the stacks of old clothes or family mementos that drew Ethan here today. It was a journal. For years, Ethan had never given the attic much thought. It was a space his parents had always filled with their old keepsakes, and after their passing, it had become a place of silence, left untouched. But now, as he sifted through the dusty boxes, his hands trembling slightly, he knew this was a moment. The journal had to be in here. Clara's journal, the one she had kept during the final years before she disappeared. Ethan could feel its presence like a phantom in the back of his mind, pushing him forward, demanding to be found. Finally, buried beneath a pile of discolored letters and yellowed newspaper clippings, he found it, a weathered, leather-bound book. Its cover was cracked, and the edges were frayed, as though it had been handled often. Clara's handwriting, neat and precise, appeared on the first page, her name inscribed in elegant cursive, Clara Carter. The moment Ethan opened the journal, he was hit by a wave of emotion. It felt like he had entered her mind once again, that connection to his sister he'd been without for so long. The pages were filled with her thoughts, fragmented, intense, and at times erratic. But as he skimmed through the entries, one thing became clear. Clara had known something about her art, something about the town. Her writings were scattered. There were no neat paragraphs or complete sentences, just thoughts pouring out of her in jagged bursts of inspiration and fear. One entry stood out to him. It read, "I see them now. It's in the art. The walls, they whisper. It's not just color, not just shape. There's a secret buried here, and I'm so close. But it's dangerous. I'm not sure I can control it anymore. The truth, it's waiting for me in the mansion. But if I go, I might not come back." The word sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. His mind raced. What mansion? What secret had Clara uncovered? Why had she written this? And why hadn't anyone known? There was a desperation in Clara's handwriting, a desperation that mirrored Ethan's own growing unease. Something had happened to his sister, something that went beyond her disappearance. He was certain now that her artwork, her obsession with her work, had led her to a place in Larkswood that the townspeople had long since forgotten. The entries grew darker as he flipped through the pages. Clara had been obsessed with a particular location in town, a mansion hidden in the forest on the outskirts of Larkswood. She had drawn several sketches of the mansion, but what struck Ethan was a strange consistency in her sketches. The details in her paintings were no longer just artistic expressions. They were maps, clues, and symbols that seemed to hint at something sinister. Every painting she had created over the last year had been leading her somewhere, each brushstroke leading her closer to the mansion and, perhaps, to the truth. Ethan could feel the walls of his childhood home close and around him as he examined the journal. His heart pounded, and his fingers trembled as he turned the pages. Then, near the end, he found something that made his blood run cold. A map. It was a rough, hand-drawn diagram of the area surrounding Larkswood. The mansion was clearly marked, but there was something more, a series of unusual symbols and lines that seemed to form a path leading directly into the heart of the forest. The path was circled in red, with one word written beneath it: truth. Ethan's mind raced. Was this it? Was this the clue that Clara had left behind? Why had she chosen this mansion? And why had she called it truth? Without thinking, Ethan grabbed the map and stuffed it into his jacket pocket. He couldn't stay here any longer. He needed answers. He needed to know what had happened to Clara and why she had left him this clue. He walked out of the attic, closing the door behind him with a soft click. The dust that had settled in his mind over the years was beginning to stir again, and with it came the overwhelming sense that the truth Clara had been chasing for so long was now within his grasp. He left the house in a haze, the map burning a hole in his pocket. His car sped down the familiar streets of Larkswood, each turn more urgent than the last. But the further he drove, the heavier his heart became. The mansion was real. It had to be. Ethan had heard the rumors growing up, stories about the grand estate at the edge of town that had fallen into disrepair long before he was born. The house had always been a ghost of the past, a place avoided by the townspeople, yet never truly forgotten. But no one ever spoke of it, not in casual conversation, and certainly not in the open. It was as if the town had agreed that the mansion would remain a shadow, just a relic of history too dangerous to disturb. Now, though, it seemed that Clara had disturbed it, and in doing so, she had awakened something far darker than anyone could have ever imagined. The truth, whatever it was waiting for him. Ethan's drive to the outskirts of Larkswood felt interminable. The familiar streets blurred past him, a rush of old memories and faces he hadn't thought about in years. The farther he went from the town center, the more the world around him seemed to change. The houses grew sparse, and the dense forest seemed to reclaim the land, swallowing the roads in its embrace. The towering trees lined the road like silent sentinels, their trunks twisted and gnarled, their leaves thick and dark. It felt like the town itself was trying to keep him out, trying to warn him to turn back. But he didn't. He couldn't. The mansion was located deep within the woods, hidden from view and overgrown with years of unchecked foliage. Ethan had heard stories about the place as a child. Rumors whispered by older folks at the local diner, tales of an abandoned estate once owned by a wealthy family that had mysteriously disappeared decades ago. The place had become something of a legend, shrouded in mystery. Its windows dark and empty, the air around it thick with unspoken fears. The mansion had stood as a symbol of the town's unacknowledged past, something everyone knew was there, but no one dared to mention. As Ethan drove, the gravel road beneath his tires turned to dirt, the air growing cooler as he ventured further into the woods. His thoughts raced as he thought of Clara's final days, the journal, the cryptic map. Why the mansion? What had she found there? He couldn't shake the image of her last, desperate entry, the word truth written in bold strokes on the unfinished canvas. Clara had been searching for something dangerous, and now, 30 years later, it was his turn to uncover it. Eventually, the trees parted, revealing the mansion in the distance. It loomed in front of him, half hidden by thick vines and foliage that had overtaken the stone walls. Despite its decayed state, there was still a sense of majesty about it, an eerie grandeur that spoke of wealth and power long since forgotten. The building's silhouette was haunting, its windows dark and broken, its stonework cracked and weathered. But what struck Ethan most was how alive it felt. The mansion seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as if it had been waiting for him. He parked the car just beyond the tree line, the crunch of gravel beneath his tires the only sound breaking the heavy silence. With a deep breath, Ethan stepped out and looked up at the mansion. The air was thick with anticipation. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to leave the mansion and its secrets buried. But there was no turning back now. He had to know what happened to Clara. He had to know the truth. The closer Ethan got to the mansion, the more the air seemed to change. The temperature dropped, and a strange sense of foreboding washed over him. The mansion loomed like a dark sentinel, its entrance surrounded by overgrown ivy and moss, as if nature itself had grown protective of the secrets hidden within. He reached the front door, which hung ajar, creaking slightly with the wind. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then pushed it open. The door groaned on its hinges as he stepped inside. The mansion's interior was cloaked in shadows, the only light coming through the cracked windows that allowed slivers of the afternoon sun to filter through the grime. Dust floated in the air, thick enough to choke, and the smell of mildew and decay hit him like a physical blow. The inside was as dilapidated as the outside. Cracked, faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, and furniture lay covered in white sheets, forgotten and rotting. But as Ethan stepped further into the darkened hallway, something fell off. There was a sense of stillness, an unnatural quiet that made his skin crawl, the kind of quiet that hinted at something lurking just out of sight. He took a deep breath, pushing the fear down, and began to explore the mansion. Each room he entered was more decayed than the last. Broken chandeliers, overturned furniture, and long-abandoned personal effects scattered around like remnants of a long-forgotten past. But what made Ethan's stomach tighten wasn't the state of the place. It was the overwhelming sense of history. There was a heaviness to the air, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of secrets too dark to be spoken aloud. He eventually came to a large study at the back of the house. The door creaked open, and as he stepped inside, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. The walls of the study were covered with sketches, many of them faded, others more recent, most of them unmistakably Clara's work. She had been here, in this very room, just as she had been in the journal. The images were distorted, unsettling, filled with the same chaotic brushstrokes that had marked her last painting. Each one seemed to capture the house, the forest, and the feeling of being watched. The more he looked at them, the more they seemed to reflect a growing terror in Clara's eyes. Some of the sketches were the mansion itself, but others were more abstract. Paintings of twisted trees, shadowy figures lurking in the corners, and broken symbols that Ethan didn't understand. There was one painting in particular that made his blood run cold, a portrait of a figure standing in the center of the mansion's grand hall. The figure was cloaked in darkness, its features obscured, but its eyes, though they weren't fully visible, seemed to stare directly at Ethan, as if it were watching him. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. A noise, soft, almost imperceptible, came from somewhere deep within the mansion. It was the faintest sound, like the rustling of fabric or the shifting of wood. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He turned slowly, his breath coming faster. Something wasn't right. The paintings, the journal, the mansion, it was all connected. Clara had been here, and she had seen something. He had no idea what it was, but he was certain of one thing. She hadn't just disappeared. She had uncovered something. Something in this house. Something about the town's past that had forced her to leave behind these clues. Ethan had found the first part of the puzzle, but he could feel it in his bones. The deeper he went, the more he realized he was no longer just searching for his sister. He was searching for a truth that had been buried for decades, a truth that might have been meant to stay hidden forever. The soft noise came again, louder this time. Ethan's pulse quickened. He wasn't alone. The mansion, it seemed, wasn't done with him yet. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest as he stood frozen in the dim study, every muscle in his body primed for action. The soft, rustling noise that echoed through the mansion seemed to grow louder, as though someone or something was moving in the shadows just out of sight. His first instinct was to turn and run, to leave the mansion and never look back. But Clara's journal, the paintings, the map, everything had led him here. He couldn't leave now. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled as his eyes darted around the room. He glanced toward the hallway beyond the study, but saw nothing. The only movement came from the dust motes swirling in the faint light that filtered through the grimy windows. Then, just as he thought he might be imagining things, a figure stepped into the doorway. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. The figure was a man, tall and thin, dressed in a dark coat that hung loosely around his frame. His face was partially obscured by the shadows, but Ethan could see the sharp outline of his features, the way his eyes glinted with an unsettling intensity. The man didn't speak. He simply stood there, watching Ethan with a gaze that made the air feel thick, suffocating. "Who are you?" Ethan's voice was barely a whisper, but it seemed to fill the room, bouncing off the walls and into the silence that surrounded them. The man didn't answer. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his boots creaking on the old wooden floor. The faint, unsettling sound echoed in the study as the man closed the distance between them, his eyes never leaving Ethan's. "You've come too far," the man said finally, his voice low and gravelly, as though it had been years since he had last spoken. Ethan's pulse raced. "Too far? What did that mean?" "I'm looking for answers," Ethan said, trying to steady his breath. "My sister, Clara, she was here. What happened to her?" The man's lips curled into a thin, almost imperceptible smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Your sister found the truth, and she couldn't leave it alone. Now neither can you." Ethan's mind raced. The truth? What truth? Clara had known something. Had she found something in this mansion that was so dangerous that it cost her everything? The man stepped closer, his presence seeming to grow larger with each step. Ethan instinctively took a step back, his feet stumbling slightly on the uneven floorboards. "Leave," the man said sharply, his voice colder now. "You've been warned." Ethan swallowed hard. He wasn't afraid of this man, not yet, but there was something about him, something that felt deeply wrong, like he was more than just a man. He was a part of something larger, something older. The mansion, the paintings, the journal, it was all connected to him, to the town, to the secrets they had buried. "I can't leave," Ethan said firmly, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "Not until I know what happened to Clara. Not until I know what you've been hiding." For the first time, the man's expression shifted. His cold smile faded, replaced by something darker. His eyes narrowed, and for a split second, Ethan could have sworn he saw something ancient and terrible, flicker in the depths of the man's gaze. "You don't know what you're dealing with," the man said quietly, his voice almost a hiss. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried. Your sister knew that. But once you dig, once you start pulling at the threads, there's no going back. Understand?" Ethan shook his head, his mind whirling. He had to know. Clara had left these clues for a reason. She hadn't just vanished. Something had happened here, in this mansion, and it wasn't just about Clara. It was about the town, the people who lived here, and the dark history that had been kept hidden for so long. The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back into shadows, his figure slowly disappearing into the hallway, his presence still lingering in the air like a heavy fog. Ethan stood there, heart pounding, unsure what to do next. Was he truly alone now, or was there something else watching, waiting? Clara's journal, the paintings, the map, they had all led him here, and now he had come too far to turn back. As the man's figure vanished completely, Ethan steeled himself. He was deep inside the mansion now, deep in the heart of the secret that had been buried for decades. He had to keep going. He had to uncover the truth about Clara and about this town. But as he moved deeper into the mansion, the air grew heavier. The paintings, the sketches, each one now felt like a piece of a puzzle he hadn't fully understood. The more he studied them, the more it became clear. This was no ordinary house. It was a place of power, a place that had been used for something far darker than anyone had ever realized. Ethan made his way toward the grand hall, the center of the mansion, where he hoped to find the answers he sought. The large double doors creaked open with a groan, revealing the vast, empty space beyond. The room was grand but decayed, with tall windows that let in the faint light of dusk. There were old portraits lining the walls, paintings of long-forgotten people whose eyes seemed to follow him as he moved. In the center of the room stood a large, broken altar, its surface covered in dust and cobwebs. But it wasn't the altar that drew his attention. It was the markings carved into the floor around it. Symbols, strange, arcane symbols, etched into wood like some ancient language. Ethan knelt down, his hand trembling as he traced the patterns with his fingers. It was then that he realized the symbols were not random. They were the same symbols Clara had painted in her journal, the same ones she had used in her artwork. A cold chill ran down his spine as he stood up and turned toward the fireplace. where something glinted in the dim light. A small, ornate box sat on the mantel, its surface covered in intricate carvings. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he reached for the box, knowing that what he was about to find would change everything. The moment his fingers touched the cold metal, the mansion seemed to stir, as though it had been waiting for this moment. The air grew still, the silence oppressive. Inside the box was a single piece of paper. As Ethan unfolded it, his hand shaking, he saw that it was a letter, written in Clara's handwriting. "I've found the truth, and I wish I hadn't." The words seemed to hang in the air, as though they were meant to be the last thing anyone ever read before it was too late. Ethan felt his blood run cold. He had no idea what Clara had uncovered, but one thing was certain now. The truth wasn't just dangerous, it was deadly. Ethan's fingers trembled as he held the letter. The ink smeared slightly from years exposure to the elements, but Clara's handwriting was still legible. "I've found the truth, and I wish I hadn't." The words echoed in his mind, reverberating like a warning bell. Every ounce of his being screamed to drop the letter, to turn around, and leave the mansion once and for all. But he couldn't. Clara had left this behind for a reason. She had been here. She had found something, and now it was his turn to finish what she had started. He unfolded the paper further, his heart pounding as he read the rest of the letter. The mansion isn't just a house. It's a prison for something ancient, something that has been hidden away for centuries. "I thought I could paint it, understand it, but I was wrong. I wasn't just painting the mansion. I was painting the thing inside it, the thing that waits. The truth is not what it seems. It's not about the town or the people. It's about something darker, something that we as a town have been keeping buried for generations. And now I'm afraid it's too late." The letter stopped there, abruptly, leaving more questions than answers. What was this thing that Clara had been painting? What had she uncovered? The letter made it clear that Clara had found something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined, something that was not just a secret, but an actual threat. Ethan's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragmented clues. The mansion, the paintings, the symbols, the map, everything had led him here. But to what? He looked around the grand hall, his eyes scanning the room for any further sign of the thing Clara had mentioned. Was it here, hidden in the walls? In the very foundation of the house? The silence in the room grew oppressive, thick with an almost palpable sense of dread. It was as if the house itself was watching him, waiting for him to make a move, to dig deeper. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature seemed to drop, and a soft whisper filled the air, almost imperceptible at first, like the rustling of leaves. But it wasn't the wind. The sound was coming from deeper within the mansion. Ethan froze, his blood running cold as the whisper grew louder, clearer. It was a voice, distant but unmistakable. "You shouldn't have come." The words echoed through the room, making Ethan's skin crawl. He turned quickly, scanning the shadows, his hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight in his pocket. The mansion seemed to stretch before him, dark corners hiding more than he could see. The voice came again, louder this time. "The truth, it's too much. It's beyond you." Ethan's heart was racing now, his pulse pounding in his ears. He couldn't tell where the voice was coming from. It was everywhere. The walls, the air, his own thoughts. The sound became a chorus of whispers, all melding together into a cacophony of voices that filled his head, making it impossible to think clearly. Suddenly, there was a loud thud behind him. He spun around, shining the flashlight in every direction, but there was nothing, just the decaying remnants of a once grand estate. His breath quickened as the whispers intensified, becoming more frantic, more desperate. "Leave now before it's too late." Without thinking, Ethan stumbled backward, knocking into a large wooden chest that had been hidden in the corner of the room. The chest creaked open under the pressure, and the moment it did, a rush of cold air swept through the room, sending a chill through his bones. Inside the chest, tucked carefully beneath layers of old cloth and papers, was something unexpected. A book, large, old, its cover bound in dark leather, the edges frayed with age. It was the kind of book that felt wrong the moment you touched it. Heavy, almost alive with some kind of dark energy. Ethan's fingers brushed the cover, and the moment they did, the whispers stopped. The room was suddenly too silent, and the weight of the book in his hands seemed unbearable. He hesitated, a part of him screaming to put it down, to leave the mansion and forget everything. But another part, the part that had driven him to come this far, pushed him forward. He opened the book, and as the first page fell away, Ethan saw something that made his stomach drop. The pages were filled with more symbols. Symbols that were eerily familiar. The same symbols from Clara's paintings. The same ones etched into the floor of the mansion. But it wasn't just that. As Ethan flipped through the pages, the drawings weren't just symbols. They were rituals. Diagrams of sacrifices. Strange, otherworldly beings. And beneath each drawing, a single word repeated over and over again. Awakening. His mind raced, but it all clicked into place. Clara had been right. The mansion wasn't just a house. It was a place of power, a place where something had been sealed away long ago. The rituals described in the book were designed to keep that thing imprisoned, but Clara's art, her obsession with the mansion, had begun to unravel those protections. She had been drawing it, painting it, unknowingly releasing it with each stroke. And now, Ethan had found the key, the book that held the instructions for the final ritual. The truth was here, in this room. It had been buried by the town's founders, kept secret for generations. The mansion was built as a prison, not just for a family, but for something far more dangerous. As Ethan closed the book, the whispers returned, louder than before. This time, they weren't just warnings. They were a command. Leave. It's too late for you. It's too late for all of us. Suddenly, the room seemed to shift. The walls trembled. The floor beneath him groaned, as if the mansion itself were waking up. Ethan's vision blurred. The shadows around him seemed to stretch and shift, becoming something more, something that wasn't human. The darkness reached out for him, and in that moment, he realized with horror that it wasn't just a mansion that had been waiting for him. It was a thing inside it. Ethan ran, his footsteps echoing in the halls as the mansion seemed to close in on him. The whispers followed, growing louder and more insistent. You've disturbed it. You've awakened it. Now it will never sleep. As Ethan reached the door, the mansion shook one final time, and the ground beneath him cracked. He stumbled outside, the cool night air hitting his face like a slap. Behind him, the mansion loomed, its silhouette black against the moonlit sky. It wasn't just a house. It was a trap, a prison for something far worse than he could ever have imagined. And now, the truth was out. But it wasn't over. It had only just begun. And the town of Larkswood, which had been hiding its darkest secret for generations, would never be the same again.